up to this point, who have you been writing for?
I've
What audiences?
Mainly myself. I mean, I've been writing for the independent cinema world. I've been looking at like 1970s American cinema, which I admire a lot, and being like, how can I contribute? I mean, it's interesting. I did my graduate at UC Davis in an art program, and one of the real values for me in that is this discussion about what are you going to contribute to what's already been said. So you normally look at like, I'm an abstract painter, and it's like, okay, what is the dialogue in the abstract world, and how are you going to contribute, instead of not just saying the same thing over and over again, or just not moving it forward. That's often the question in graduate school, is like, what are you contributing? So I approached it that same way. It's like 1970s American cinema is, for me, the great era of American cinema, with a lot of dialogue about what was going on in the world, what society we want to live in, acknowledging aspects of life that are existing.
Yeah.
So as I started making films, it was like, okay, the 70s, and then blockbusters happened, in the 80s. So I'm like, can we go back there? Can we look at like what was being discussed, and can we further the dialogue
conversation?
And so, if I say directly The Killing of Two Lovers, for example, it's like, okay, the ideology of marriage is like that it's amazing, and that it's just like the best decision that anyone can ever make. And they're not wrong, but no one ever gets it, like, how gritty it actually is.
Yeah.
That two people learning to compromise on a regular basis. It's like, where are we going to eat dinner? Like, the reality is one person could go to, get pizza, and one person go get ribs. But for some reason you decide, no, well, we should go to the same place though, right?
Yeah.
And so you make this compromise of going to the same place, or same. My wife always gets frustrated because I'm like, maybe I'll get my own bed. And she's like, why would you ever do that? And I was like, well, we have differences in like type of bed we want,
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we should, you don't do that. You sleep in the same bed. So there's all these, like, those are subtle, but then you start getting bigger. Like, you have children, and you're like, how do you want to raise your children? What are some of the ideologies, or the way you want them to exist? Because anything you teach your children is ingrained, embedded in them. If you teach them to recycle, they care about recycling. If you throw your trash on the side of the road, they probably throw their trash on the side of the road. And eventually they'll become their own people, but those ideologies are always embedded in them. So it gets complicated.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking at Killing Two Lovers, is of course a film, but it's also looking at like marriage in and of itself is complicated. There are pretty intense arguments. There is periods of time where you don't want to be around each other.
Yeah.
But there is, in many ways, value of like working through those things. And I think if more people kind of understood that, they might go in a marriage actually better informed.
Yeah.
And then it wouldn't be like you have a big argument and you're like, oh, maybe we're not going to make it.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, no, this is just part of the process. With God Bless the Child, that film was motivated by my dad, who had, he told me a story about his mom who would, she struggled with depression, and she would just pack up and leave at times in his life. She, if people didn't eat their green beans at dinner, she would like go in her room, fill a suitcase, and leave. Yeah. And he was, I think, 63 at the time he told that story. And I was like, wow. I mean, he talks about his mother, but he never really shared the impact on him.
Yeah.
And so there's these interesting things about him. He'll eat everything on his plate, even when he comes over to our house. And if Rebecca and I somehow get in an argument, even at dinner, he gets very quiet and very focused on his food, And I was so impacted by that I was like, obviously he's not an isolated story. And it's like, we've seen stories that deal with depression, but normally it's the lead character is the person dealing with depression.
Yeah.
I was like, could we take a story and deal with the impact on the children? And so God Bless the Child really looks at that impact. And because the kids are different ages in the movie when you meet them, there's different relationships to understanding what's going on. The 1.5-year-old in the film's not going to really know what's going on, but the 13-year-old does know what's going on.
Yeah.
In the case of my dad, he was very much the oldest kid, and so he was responsible to kind of parent the younger kids in that kind of struggle. So I'm making these films in to some degree for myself, but I'm also aware that that story is not singular.
Yeah.
And so that film got into South by Southwest, and a result of it is meeting, like after the Q&A, people being like, okay, I'm Ari, or I'm, Harper, or
They
I'm...
connect with it.
Yeah, I had a social worker who came up after and was like, I deal with these families every day. And I always hope that there's a Harper in those families because she's the older sibling. So the film ends up connecting universally, but it's not going to be a blockbuster. Nobody wants to.
Yeah.
Like, there's a limit to how much people want to handle sad or hard stories. It's like, there's only so many, as opposed to watching an Adam Sandler, Grown Ups, or another movie that you can just, like, if your job already sucks, you can turn off and relax for a period of time.